Welcome to the Dreamy Deep Dive. It's Hill here.
And Monique. And this is the space we craft, well, just for you, our listener, a place to step away from all the screens, the constant buzz.
Right, turn off the visual input for a while. Just surrender to a journey guided purely by sound, by thought.
And remember, as always, this is all audio only. We do this deliberately. It's about non-visual, brain-enticing content.
So if you're settled in at home, maybe, close your eyes. Let the world fade a bit.
Or if you're driving, please just relax. Let the conversation, the gentle pace, let the story itself guide your focus. Stay safe, of course.
We really emphasize taking this time because, honestly, it's profoundly restorative, isn't it?
Absolutely. Think for a second about the health benefits.
Yeah.
You're easing that constant digital eye strain. You know that tension you get in your face, your neck from leaning towards a screen all day?
You're letting that go.
And you actually lower your baseline stress levels. It can support better sleep, help regulate your mood, just by removing the endless ping of notifications.
It's amazing what happens when you let your mind wander a bit. Even while focusing on something complex like history, it fosters, well, deeper relaxation.
Yeah, and better posture, surprisingly. Plus, you create that mental clarity you need for, really thinking things through, restorative thought.
It really is time well spent, a quiet moment. Your mind can focus freely, no visual distractions.
So settle in, breathe deep.
And let us take you back, way back, to the 12th century. Because today, we're exploring something historians have almost labeled a forbidden truth.
We are unmasking one of the most, truly bizarre, shocking, and frankly, historically disturbing stories ever documented in medieval England.
We're talking about the jaw-dropping recorded appearance of two children with completely green skin.
This is the story of the Green Children of Woolpit. And look, these weren't just whispers or folk tales passed down generations later. They were recorded by, pretty sober and critical chroniclers at the time.
And these children, they claimed they'd fallen into our world somehow from a subterranean land, a land of perpetual twilight.
It's a reality so destabilizing that, honestly, historians ever since have struggled. How do you categorize this?
It almost suggests that 12th century England was, host to visitors from some unseen world. It's mind-bending.
The basic facts, though, they're pretty consistent across the main accounts. It happened during harvest time in this little village called Woolpit in Suffolk.
And the name itself, Woolpit, it's a clue, isn't it?
It really is. It comes from wolf pits. These were ancient cavities, possibly man-made, possibly natural, used to trap wolves.
And the story goes, the children just emerged from near these pits, suddenly.
And their appearance was shocking. Completely green skin. Not just pale, but green.
They were wearing clothes made of strange materials, unknown fabrics, and they were speaking a language absolutely nobody in the village recognized.
You can imagine the scene. They must have been utterly isolated, terrified, distressed.
And then there's the diet. This is one of the weirdest, most specific details.
Right. They refused everything. All the normal food the villagers offered them. They were apparently starving, near death.
Until someone brought in raw broad beans. Fava beans, basically.
And the reaction was immediate. The children seized the stalks, frantically searching for the beans inside, the pulse.
The villagers had to show them how to open the pods, apparently, and once they did, the kids ate them, well, the accounts say, with avidity, like they were desperate for them.
And they lived on only those raw beans for months. Nothing else.
Eventually, they were taken into the household of a local nobleman, a Sir Richard de Calne, a real person.
Yes, a documented figure. And here the story kind of diverges, outcome-wise.
The boy, the younger one, he seemed to fade. He sadly died not long after he was baptized.
But the girl, she survived. And gradually, that startling green color faded from her skin.
She learned English, she adapted, and reportedly she integrated so completely that she ended up marrying a man in a nearby town called Lynn, possibly King's Lynn.
So our mission in this Dreamy Deep Dive is really to explore why this story just endures. It hasn't faded away.
We have these very specific plot points. The green skin, the bean diet, this place called St. Martin's Land they claim to be from. And these details, they somehow suggest both a myth, a fairy tale almost, and a grounded historical event simultaneously.
Exactly. It's that tension. So we're going to unpack the two main near-contemporary accounts. Look at the subtle differences, compare the nuances.
And explore every angle, right? From, possible medical conditions and historical refugee theories.
All the way to the deep echoes of medieval folklore, beliefs about fairies, the underworld. Even modern ideas about interdimensional travelers, though that's obviously way outside the original context.
But we want to get at what fundamental story the medieval mind was telling itself. What did this event mean to them? How did they process the appearance of the other suddenly arriving at the edge of their known world?
It's a fascinating puzzle.
Okay, let's dig in. Let's start with the foundation, the sources themselves. Because the survival of this incredible, almost unbelievable tale, it isn't down to village gossip spreading for centuries.
No, not at all. It's owed almost entirely to two primary, quite scholarly documents written in Latin not too long after the events supposedly happened. We're talking about documented history here, or at least attempts at it.
We're not dealing with, like, anonymous oral tradition that could get warped over time.
Precisely. The two main sources are, well, one is a history of English affairs written around 1189 by a cleric in Yorkshire. The other is a chronicle from an abbey closer to Woolpit, written a bit later, maybe around 1220.
Okay, and as we talk about these accounts, these chroniclers, let me just remind you, our listener, you don't need to memorize the names or the Latin titles or the exact dates.
No, please don't. Just listen. Relax into the story. Let us handle this sort of the scholarly scaffolding. We'll keep track of who said what.
Just enjoy the dreamy deep dive with us. No screen time needed.
Okay, so let's start with the first writer, the Augustinian canon up in Yorkshire. He's known for being, well, relatively critical for his time. A skeptical historian, you might say. He liked reliable sources.
And that skepticism, that's actually what makes his testimony so powerful, isn't it?
It really is. He specifically writes that he doubted this story for a long time. He apparently thought it was, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, ridiculous to give credit to something with no rational foundation. It just didn't fit his logical, learned view of the world.
But
he says he was basically overwhelmed by the weight of so many and such competent witnesses. People in the area, reliable people apparently, kept insisting it was true.
So he felt he had to include it.
Exactly. He felt compelled. He writes something like he was forced to believe and wonder over a matter he was unable to comprehend or unravel by any powers of intellect.
Wow, so this isn't a guy making up a spooky story for fun. This is a scholar grappling with something inexplicable that multiple sources swore was real.
That's the feeling you get. And he provides a crucial historical anchor. He firmly places the event during the reign of King Stephen. That's 1135 to 1154.
And that period, as you mentioned, was known as the Anarchy. It was brutal. Civil war, collapse of central authority, famine, just widespread chaos.
A really grim backdrop, which maybe makes the sudden appearance of these strange children even more unsettling, you know? Adds to the feeling of things being fundamentally broken or strange.
So, what details does this Yorkshire writer give about their arrival?
His version is quite vivid. He says they suddenly appeared by the wolf pits after hearing a great sound.
A sound.
Yeah, which they later, once the girl learned English, identified as being like the bells we are now accustomed to hear at St. Edmund's. That's referencing the really powerful, famous Bury St. Edmund's Abbey nearby.
Huh. So the bells act as a sort of sonic trigger, or a bridge between their world and this one.
It seems that way in his telling, and he records their description of their homeland, St. Martin's Land.
Okay, St. Martin's Land, what was it like?
They described it as, interestingly, a Christian country, with churches even. But critically, it had no sun. They lived in a state of perpetual twilight.
Twilight, like a dusk of dawn all the time.
Yes, he quotes them saying it was like the light which among you precedes the sunrise or follows the sunset. Constant dimness.
That's incredibly evocative.
Isn't it? And he includes this other profound detail. They mention seeing a luminous country nearby, across a very considerable river, a land of light they couldn't reach.
Wow. Okay, and how does his account end?
He focuses on the girl's assimilation, her success story, really. He says she married a man at Lynn, probably King's Lynn, and was, quote, living a few years since when he was writing.
So providing proof she became part of English society, integrated.
That seems to be his emphasis. The strangeness is contained, assimilated.
Okay, now let's turn to the second main source. The chronicle written by the Cistercian abbot, much closer to Woolpit itself, right?
Yeah.
Only about 26 miles away.
That's right. His monastery was at Coggeshall. And that proximity gives his account a slightly different feel, maybe more intimate, more local.
And his source of information is different too.
Much more direct, or so he claims. He says he got the details directly from Sir Richard de Callan's own household, from the knight who actually took the children in.
So potentially closer to the eyewitness accounts.
Potentially. Though maybe less filtered, less objective than the Yorkshire scholar's summary, perhaps. Hard to say. But likely reflecting the story as it was told locally.
And does his version differ much?
There are small, but I think significant differences. They change the feel of the story.
Like what?
Well, in his telling, the children didn't just sort of appear by the pits. They were apparently tending their father's flocks.
Oh, so they had parents in their world.
Seems so in this version. And they followed some stray cattle into a cave. They heard bells. The bells are in both accounts. But then they were suddenly hit with bright sunlight and warm air, became disoriented, and couldn't find the cave entrance again.
So that suggests more of a definite physical journey through a passage, underground, albeit accidental.
It does read that way, yes. Less magical appearance, more getting lost and stumbling through a portal almost.
Interesting. Any other key differences?
Yes, his take on the girl's assimilation is, well, less positive.
Oh. The first writer said she married and was living normally.
He acknowledges she served in Sir Richard's household for many years, learned English, lost the green color, but he adds this little comment that she was rather flighty and impudent. Wanton and impertinent are other translations.
Flighty and impudent? What does that imply?
It suggests a kind of lingering otherness, doesn't it? Even after she looked normal, maybe she didn't quite conform to the expected behavior, the moral standards of the time. A hint of wildness, maybe.
That's a subtle but important contrast.
And perhaps most crucially, this second writer, the abbot, includes a detail the Yorkshireman missed entirely.
What's that?
According to him, the girl stated that where she came from, everyone and everything was green.
Wait, not just the children, the whole world was green.
That's what his account claims, which completely changes the picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The first account makes them sound like anomalies, two green kids from a twilight land. This one makes them sound like normal inhabitants of an entirely green dimension.
It's a massive difference in implication.
So, two accounts, similar core story, but these key variations. How do scholars explain that?
The general thinking is that both writers probably drew on an earlier, now lost, local record. Maybe something written down closer to the event, or a very strong oral tradition associated with Sir Richard's household. Let's call it Source X.
And each writer filtered it.
Pretty much. Each man, writing decades later for a specific audience with his own worldview and purpose, likely selected, emphasized, and maybe even subtly reshaped the details to fit his narrative needs.
But the story itself, they couldn't just ignore it. Why not? Why did these series chroniclers feel the need to record something so fantastical?
I think it comes back to Sir Richard de Calne. He wasn't just some local farmer. He was a real historical figure, identified by scholars as likely Richard Barr, a fairly high-ranking royal justice and Archdeacon of Ely.
Ah, so a significant person, verifiable.
Exactly. And the fact that this incredibly bizarre event was rooted in his household, vouched for by his people, gave it a weight it wouldn't otherwise have had. It anchored the fantastical in a specific, documented historical reality.
So it wasn't just a village rumor they could easily dismiss. It had high-status witnesses, in a sense.
Precisely. It forced them to take it seriously, even if they couldn't explain it. It was history, happening to real people they knew or knew of, not just a fairy tale.
Okay, that makes sense. We have the framework, the sources. Now, let's really dive into the details that make this story so persistently strange, so unforgettable.
Right. And we have to start with the visual centerpiece. The skin. The completely green skin.
The chroniclers were really clear, weren't they? This wasn't just looking a bit peaky or sallow.
Not at all. They described them as completely green persons. The Yorkshire writer called it an unheard-of prodigy. That phrasing is key, suggesting nothing like this had ever been seen or recorded in their collective experience. It was utterly novel.
So let's tackle the most common rational explanation first, the one you always hear. Hypochromic anemia or chlorosis, the green sickness.
This was a real condition caused by severe iron deficiency, sometimes other nutritional issues like B6 deficiency. It did cause a noticeable greenish or sickly yellow-green pallor.
And it was apparently more common in malnourished people, especially, well, women and girls in the medieval period.
Correct. And the appeal of this theory is obvious. The story says the girl's green color faded after she started eating a normal English diet.
Right. Her body started getting iron, producing normal red blood cells, and her complexion returned to, well, normal. It fits neatly, doesn't it?
It does seem to fit, but, and this is where the Dreamy Deep Dive approach means we have to push a little.
Go on.
Remember the context? William of Newburgh, the Yorkshire chronicler, was writing after the Anarchy, a period of terrible famine and a widespread malnutrition.
So people looking pale and sickly, maybe even greenish from anemia, must have been a relatively common sight.
You'd absolutely think so.
Yeah.
So would a learned scholar like him, familiar with the hardships of his time, really describe a severe case of anemia, however striking, as an unheard-of prodigy, something utterly beyond comprehension?
Probably not. It suggests the greenness was something more extreme, more vibrant, more unnatural than just sickness.
That's the feeling the language gives. A uniform, startling green. If it was just chlorosis, you'd expect them to recognize it as, a terrible consequence of starvation, not something fundamentally alien or magical.
Okay, so if simple anemia seems maybe too weak an explanation for the shock described, what else is there?
Well, this leads us to a more modern speculation, but one that tries to ground the fantasy in a different, harsher reality. The copper mine theory.
Copper mine, how does that fit?
The idea is that the children might have been effectively enslaved, or perhaps just lost and trapped, in a hidden copper mine, or possibly a tin mine.
Okay. How does that explain the details?
It potentially explains several key elements at once. First, St. Martin's Land, the perpetual twilight, if you're trapped underground in a mine.
You're living in darkness or near darkness. Perpetual twilight, okay.
Right. Second, the green skin. Think about copper. Copper dust, copper compounds.
Could that stain the skin green? Especially if they weren't able to wash.
It's certainly possible. Chronic exposure to copper dust, maybe combined with poor hygiene and malnutrition, could potentially lead to a noticeable greenish or bluish-green tint to the skin. It would definitely be startling.
And the lack of sun and poor diet underground would compound their physical state, making them look even stranger.
Exactly. And this theory could also potentially tie back to the language barrier.
How so?
If the mine was secret, maybe located somewhere remote, perhaps near the Welsh borderlands where mining occurred, or even a hidden local operation in East Anglia, the language they spoke could have been, say, Welsh, or some very localized dialect completely unknown to the Saxon or Norman villagers of Woolpit.
Which would instantly mark them as other, alien. Okay, that hangs together quite well. The darkness, the green skin, the strange language, all potentially explained by this awful scenario.
It's a compelling, though tragic, rationalization.
But wait, there's always a but, isn't there? If they were enslaved or trapped in a mine, why would they suddenly emerge into a busy village during harvest time? Wouldn't they try to stay hidden or escape more cautiously?
That is a definite friction point in the theory. It doesn't quite explain the manner of their appearance perfectly. Proponents might suggest they were perhaps abandoned by their captors, or maybe they managed a desperate escape and were simply lost and disoriented.
Maybe like the second account suggested, following cattle into a cave, getting lost.
Perhaps. Maybe they were starving, heard sounds of life from the surface, the harvest. The cattle followed the sounds up through some shaft or cave passage, and then found themselves blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, unable to find their way back.
It paints a really bleak picture. A rational explanation maybe, but a deeply sad one. It accounts for the core physical strangeness, even if the emergence remains a bit puzzling.
It does. It shifts the mystery from the supernatural to the potentially tragically human.
Okay, let's move on to the next barrier. The language. They spoke something utterly unknown. Ralph of Coggeshall's account says they began to weep and utter a strange sort of speech.
That immediate inability to communicate is crucial. It instantly marked them as outsiders, as fundamentally different.
So, what are the theories here? The most common historical one seems to be the Flemish hypothesis, right?
Yes, especially tied to that Fornham-St. Martin battle theory we touched on. East Anglia, where Woolpit is, did have a significant population of Flemish weavers and settlers. And later, Flemish mercenaries were active in the conflicts.
And the Flemish were sometimes viewed with suspicion, weren't they? Especially around the time of Henry II, who cracked down on them after some rebellions.
They were. So the idea is, could the language simply have been Flemish? Perhaps a specific, maybe rural dialect that the local English-speaking villagers just didn't recognize.
And maybe the chroniclers, or Sir Richard's household telling the story later, exaggerated how unknown the language was to make the story more dramatic.
It's possible. Language barriers can feel absolute, even when they're not, especially with children in distress. However,
Another but.
well, Sir Richard de Calne, or Richard Barr, was a sophisticated man, a royal justice, an archdeacon. He traveled. He would likely have encountered various European languages, including possibly Flemish, in his work.
So would he really classify Flemish, even a dialect, as a completely alien tongue, something utterly unrecognizable? It seems a bit of a stretch for a man of his standing.
It does strain credulity somewhat. which pushes us to consider other possibilities, perhaps rooted in trauma or extreme isolation.
Like what?
Well, consider something like cryptophagia. That's the phenomenon of twins or siblings in very close, isolated circumstances, developing their own private language.
A secret language only they understand.
Exactly. If these children were orphaned, perhaps witnessed something terrible, maybe the death of their parents, either in that hypothetical mine or during the violence of the anarchy, they might have retreated into their own unique linguistic world, genuinely incomprehensible to outsiders.
That's a chilling thought. Or maybe it wasn't even a distinct language.
Perhaps not. It could have been trauma-induced speech difficulty, profound shock, loss, severe malnutrition. These can all severely impact a child's ability to articulate, to communicate coherently. Maybe they were speaking garbled fragments of their original tongue, distorted by trauma.
And the boy's death before he really learned English, that would only reinforce his image as the alien who couldn't bridge the gap.
While the girl's eventual mastery of English became her symbolic passport into the human community, her integration.
That journey from incomprehensible sound to understandable speech is so fundamental, isn't it? Language as the ultimate boundary between the known world and the unknown other.
Absolutely. It defines who's us and who's them.
Okay, language is one puzzle, but maybe the most bizarre, the most evocative detail of all is the food.
The diet.
Ah, yes.
The beans.
They refused everything else, starving, but raw broad beans. They devoured them and lived on them for months until they finally adapted to eating bread.
It's such a specific, strange detail. How do we unpack that?
Well, if we stick to the rational interpretations for a moment, the copper mine slaves or the lost refugees, could there be a simple explanation?
Possibly. Broad beans, or fava beans, were a staple crop, sometimes fed to livestock, sometimes eaten by the poorest people, maybe mashed into a coarse gruel or porridge.
So if they came from extreme poverty or captivity, maybe beans were the only food they recognized, or the only thing remotely palatable from their previous awful diet.
That's the argument. Their frantic searching for the beans inside the pods could be seen as a desperate craving for the one familiar, maybe essential, part of their restricted food supply. A strong behavioral clue about their past life.
Okay, that's the rational take. Plausible, maybe.
But in the medieval world, that detail would have resonated on a completely different level. A much deeper symbolic level.
Because of what broad beans represented.
Exactly. Broad beans had ancient, powerful associations across European folklore and mythology. They were deeply connected to death, to souls, to the underworld.
Really? The food of the dead.
That's literally what they were sometimes called in ancient texts. Their use in funerary rites goes way back. Greece, Rome. You even have figures like Pythagoras supposedly warning his followers never to eat them, believing the hollow stalks connected directly to Hades, the realm of the dead.
Wow. I had no idea beans had such heavy symbolism.
It was potent. So, a medieval observer, already living in a world full of signs and wonders, hearing that these strange green children would only eat the food of the dead.
They would immediately see that as confirmation, wouldn't they? Confirmation that these children weren't just foreigners, but beings who had crossed over from another realm. The land of the dead, or maybe the fairy realm.
Precisely. Their exclusive reliance on this symbolically charged food would have cemented their otherworldly status in the minds of the villagers and the chroniclers, regardless of any later, more rational explanations the girl might have offered.
So the beans become this crucial bridge. They link the possible historical tragedy, malnourished, lost children directly to the powerful mythological narrative of beings from the underworld.
Yes. They ate the food associated with death, which proved their origin in that twilight land they described.
Which brings us neatly to that land itself, St. Martin's Land, this twilight realm.
The place they claim to be inhabitants of. A Christian place, interestingly, with churches, but perpetually dim, no sun, and separated from a luminous land by a great river.
That description is just dripping with symbolism, isn't it?
Absolutely. That great river, it immediately evokes mythological dividers between worlds. The river Styx in Greek myth, or similar boundaries in medieval Christian ideas about the afterlife, purgatory, or even the entrance to paradise.
And that luminous country nearby, across the river. It sounds like a glimpse of heaven, or the true world of light that the inhabitants of St. Martin's Land could see but not reach.
Exactly. It places the children firmly in a liminal space, a borderland, a zone of twilight transition perhaps between life and death, or our world and another.
Which strengthens the folklore interpretation, doesn't it? That the Green Children are basically classic figures from the fairy realm.
It fits remarkably well. Green skin is often associated with fairies or nature spirits in Celtic and English folklore. Subterranean origins emerging from pits or caves, that's another classic fairy trope, and the twilight world, very common in descriptions of fairy realms.
And what about the bells? Both counts mention the sound of bells, like St. Edmund's, just before they appeared or crossed over. Does that fit the folklore pattern too?
Oh, absolutely. The sound of bells, particularly church bells, often functions in European myths and legends as a signal of a threshold crossing, a moment when the veil between worlds becomes thin, permeable. The bells literally ring them into our world or mark their passage.
It's like the sound pierces the barrier.
Precisely. And there might even be a subtle link to the calendar, adding another layer.
How so?
Well, the land is St. Martin's land. St. Martin's feast day, Martin Ross, is November 11th. That falls very close to All Hallows Eve and All Souls Day, the period around Halloween and early November when the barrier between the living and the dead was traditionally believed to be at its most porous.
So naming the land after St. Martin subtly connects it to that time of year when spirits and otherworldly beings were thought to roam more freely.
It's a potential symbolic resonance, yes. It anchors their mysterious origin in a period already associated with spiritual ambiguity and border crossings.
Okay, so the folklore interpretation seems really strong, hitting all these symbolic notes. But the rationalists push back, right? They try to ground St. Martin's land in actual geography.
They do. The main historical counter-theory proposes that St. Martin's land isn't a magical realm at all, but simply a confused or distorted reference to a real place nearby, the town of Fornham St. Martin.
Which ties back to the Flemish refugee idea.
Exactly. This is the core of that hypothesis, put forward by some historians trying to find a purely mundane explanation. Fornham St. Martin, just a few miles from Woolpit, was the site of a major battle in 1173.
The Battle of Fornham, where King Henry II's forces defeated those Flemish mercenaries.
Right. A bloody battle. Many Flemish killed or scattered. So the argument goes, these children were orphans, or lost relatives of those defeated Flemish soldiers. They fled the battle, perhaps hid in local woods, caves, or even old chalk mines or flint mines common in that area.
Living rough, in the twilight of hiding, malnourished.
Speaking Flemish, a foreign tongue. And Fornham St. Martin might have been the last place they remembered as home or the center of their community before the disaster. So when asked where they were from, they garbled the name, which came out as St. Martin's Land.
It's a very neat, compelling, and deeply humanizing theory. It turns the whole strange story into a tragic consequence of war.
It absolutely does. It offers a complete, rational explanation package. However,
Comes the big problem.
the timeline. The chronology just doesn't work smoothly.
Because the first chronicler, the skeptical Yorkshireman William of Newburgh, he was very specific about the date, wasn't he?
Extremely specific. He firmly places the Green Children event during the reign of King Stephen, which ended in 1154.
And the Battle of Fornham.
Happened in 1173. That's nearly 20 years later, almost a generation.
So William's dating completely disconnects the Green Children from that specific battle and the Flemish refugee scenario tied to it.
It does. Unless William was completely wrong about the dating, which is possible, he was writing decades later, then the Fornham battle theory doesn't fit his account at all.
And this is why the story resists easy answers.
Exactly. This stubborn ambiguity, this chronological conflict, is central to why the mystery endures. The story seems to exist in this uncomfortable space where verifiable history, the night Sir Richard Barr, the village of Woolpit, the girls' recorded assimilation, can't be cleanly separated from these powerful resonant symbols of mythology, the green skin, the underworld food, the twilight realm, the problematic timeline.
It functions as both, a record of a bizarre event and some kind of deeper allegory or symbolic narrative.
Which makes you wonder about the chroniclers themselves. What were their agendas? Why include this story in their larger histories?
Right. Let's take that crucial step back. This story wasn't just published as a standalone pamphlet about weird kids. It was embedded within massive, serious works of history.
That tells us it served a purpose for the writers. It wasn't just filler. It was likely a vehicle for them to discuss, maybe subconsciously, deeper anxieties, political, social, cultural.
Let's look at the first writer again, the Yorkshire canon, William of Newburgh. What might his inner anxiety have been? Scholars have noted how he groups the Green Children's story.
Yes, he puts it alongside 3 other short tales, all involving strange, underground prodigies. There's one about a dog found miraculously sealed inside a rock.
Okay.
Another about a toad discovered with a gold chain around its neck.
Weird.
And a third about a man who stole a chalice from some kind of subterranean feast or community he stumbled upon.
So the common thread is something strange, maybe valuable or disruptive, emerging from below ground, challenging the normal surface world.
Exactly. And some scholars interpret this cluster of stories as William's way of processing the ongoing cultural and political trauma of the Norman conquest of 1066.
Ah, he was writing as an Englishman, but living in an Anglo-Norman society created by that conquest, a world where the old order had been violently overthrown by an alien force, the Normans.
Right. So in this interpretation, the Green Children story, particularly the girl story, becomes a powerful allegory for William's hopes, maybe his subconscious desires for political and cultural healing.
How so?
Think about her trajectory in his account. She arrives alien, green, speaking an unknown tongue. But then, she loses the greenness, she learns English, she marries locally, becomes part of the gentry. She successfully integrates, she assimilates.
So her transformation mirrors the way the Norman invaders were over time becoming more English, assimilating into the Anglo-Saxon culture they had conquered.
That's the argument. The green girl, for William, might symbolize a pathway out of the destructive alienation represented perhaps by her dead brother and her strange origins, and towards a stable, integrated English identity, especially after the chaos of the anarchy during Stephen's reign.
She represents hope for unity, someone who remembers her different roots, the Twilight Land, but becomes fully part of the dominant culture.
Precisely. She bridges the gap. She offers a symbolic resolution to the us versus them tension that defined post-conquest England for him.
That's a fascinating reading. But the other chronicler, the Abbot Ralph of Coggeshall, he frames it differently, doesn't he? Leading to a potentially darker interpretation.
He does frame it very differently. He places the Green Children's story among accounts of other beings who are physically different.
Like what?
There's a story about a wild man, covered in hair, pulled from the sea near Orford. There are tales of giant footprints being found, and an account of a troublesome house spirit named Malakin, who could speak but was usually invisible.
So his grouping emphasizes physical strangeness, bodily difference from the human norm.
Exactly. And in the medieval worldview, the physical body was often seen as a metaphor for the social body, for society itself. So an anomalous or different body could symbolize a society facing threats, disintegration, or perhaps spiritual error.
And Ralph, being a Cistercian abbot writing around the time of the Crusades, maybe he had a more didactic purpose.
That's the suggestion. His grouping of these tales about the other, the wild man, the giants, the spirit, the green children, might have served a moralizing function, encouraging his readers, likely other monks or clergy, to reflect on the nature of difference, the potential threats posed by the unknown, the foreign, the spiritually suspect.
Maybe commenting on the conflicts of his own time, like the Crusades against Muslims, or even internal conflicts within Christendom or fears of heresy.
It's quite possible. His focus seems less on assimilation and more on the enduring nature of difference.
And that fits with his little comment about the girl being flighty and impudent, doesn't it?
It fits perfectly. That's not just a casual observation in this context. It reads like a moral judgment. It suggests that even after she looked normal, even after she assimilated physically and linguistically, that inherent otherness, the element that came from outside, the potentially non-normative spiritual or moral strain it remained.
So for Ralph, maybe assimilation wasn't really possible, or at least it should be viewed with suspicion. The foreign element, once introduced, is never fully erased or trusted.
That seems to be the underlying message. He sees the girl's integration, but highlights her lingering flaws, suggesting the alien core persists, perhaps subtly dangerous or morally suspect in his eyes.
Wow. Two chroniclers, same core story, but drawing such different conclusions about assimilation and otherness, likely reflecting their own times and anxieties.
It really shows how history gets shaped by the historian.
And the story's legacy shows this process continuing, right? How later eras reinterpret the Green Children based on their own preoccupations.
Absolutely. The story didn't just vanish after the Middle Ages. It resurfaced in the early modern period, and people reacted very differently.
Some just dismissed it.
Yeah, figures like the famous antiquarian William Camden, writing in the late 16th, early 17th century, basically called it a ridiculous hoax, a silly village tale, pure skepticism.
But others took it more seriously, or at least more imaginatively.
Definitely. Bishop Francis Godwin, for example. He explicitly used the Green Children story, particularly their description of a different world, as a direct inspiration for his amazing 1638 book, The Man in the Moon.
Which is considered one of the earliest works of science fiction in English.
It is. So the Green Children went from medieval prodigy to early modern science fiction prompt.
Right.
It shows that medieval wonder about subterranean worlds could evolve seamlessly into early modern speculation about other planets, other forms of life.
And then in the 19th century, folklorists picked it up again.
Right. When people like Thomas Keightley included it in collections of fairy tales and folklore, they really cemented the mythological reading. The children became firmly associated with fairies, goblins, the supernatural inhabitants of the hidden realms.
And today, how do we reinterpret them now?
Well, inevitably, the story gets filtered through modern anxieties and fascinations. So the Green Children often pop up in discussions of ufology.
Ah, the little green men trope. Did it originate here?
It's definitely one of the earliest documented instances of little green people appearing, though the direct line to modern sci-fi aliens is debated. But yes, they get interpreted as extraterrestrials.
Or interdimensional travelers, beings who slipped through a crack between realities.
Exactly. The setting shifts from the medieval fairy realm or St. Martin's Land to another planet or another dimension, but the fundamental narrative core is identical.
Someone from out there, completely different, has suddenly appeared right here. And we, the observers, have to scramble to find a category and explanation for how this impossible breach occurred.
It perfectly illustrates our enduring human need to classify the inexplicable, to fit anomalies into our current understanding of the world, whether that's medieval theology or modern physics or pseudophysics.
So as we kind of wrap up this dreamy deep dive, where does that leave us? We're sort of back where that first chronicler, William of Newburgh, found himself, aren't we?
Pretty much. Overwhelmed by the wonder, as he put it. Faced with a story, a matter that we can't quite comprehend or unravel using any single explanation.
The Green Children of Woolpit really do seem to function like a historical Rorschach test. You see in them what your own era, your own beliefs predispose you to see.
The specific facts reported, the green skin, the unknown tongue, the bean diet, the land of St. Martin, they're just detailed enough, just strange enough, that they simultaneously point towards a real, perhaps tragic, historical event, like sick refugees or lost children.
And also towards a profound mythological narrative full of symbols about fairies, the underworld, other dimensions.
And the story's real power, its persistence, maybe lies precisely in those fault lines, in the gaps between the possible mundane explanation and the undeniable mythic resonance.
And also in the differences between the chroniclers themselves, right? Between William's relatively optimistic view of assimilation and Ralph's more suspicious, moralizing judgment.
Absolutely. Those differences tell us maybe more about the anxieties and worldviews of 12th and 13th century England than they definitively tell us about who the Green Children actually were.
We know the girl survived. She learned English, she assimilated, she married. The historical record seems pretty solid on that.
And the record also states, tantalizingly, that once she could speak, she offered many other replies too long to narrate. That's a direct quote, or close to it, from one of the accounts.
Too long to narrate. And that, I think, leaves us with the final, really provocative thought to carry away from this.
Go on.
What were those other replies? What crucial, maybe world-bending, maybe terrifying details did the medieval chroniclers, bound as they were by their Christian worldview, their political contexts, their sense of what was proper history, what did they choose to leave out?
What truth might the Green Girl have revealed about St. Martin's Land? About how they crossed over, about the luminous country that were simply too bizarre, too disruptive, too theologically problematic, or maybe just too chaotic to commit to the pages of their sober chronicles? What did they suppress?
What parts of her story were deemed too long or perhaps too strange to narrate? That silence is almost as fascinating as the details they did record.
It really is. The unknown unknowns of the story.
Well, that feels like a good place to pause and reflect.
And we really want to thank you, our listener, for taking this significant amount of time with us today, for stepping away from the screens, the notifications, the constant demands.
Remember those benefits we talked about. Just by listening, you've given your eyes a rest, maybe lowered your stress a little, created some mental space.
Hopefully, this quiet moment of focused listening has helped ease your mind, boost your clarity, and allowed some room for restorative thought, for wonder. It's important.
It really is. It's been a genuine pleasure guiding you through this incredible, enduring mystery. It's Hill and Monique here, signing off from this dreamy deep dive.
If you enjoyed this kind of calming, yet knowledgeable and in-depth exploration, please do subscribe to Dreamy Deep Dive. We'd love for you to join us on our next journey into history and mystery.
Yeah, hit that bell button too if you want to be notified when new audio-only deep dives like this one are released.
And perhaps most importantly, if you found value in this, please give this episode a like. It really helps get it recommended to other listeners out there who might be searching for exactly this kind of non-visual, brain-enticing content.
Or, share it. Share it with friends or family whom you think would appreciate taking a quiet moment to focus and learn something fascinating without staring at a screen.
The mystery of the Green Children of Woolpit. It may genuinely never be solved, but the story itself, it just keeps walking, doesn't it? Green and strange, right there at the misty edge of our historical understanding.
Keep wondering.